Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Okay, now we're live. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Ian Carlin. I wanted to take a moment here. I had somebody write in some questions about some biblical topics to me, and he wanted me to answer some of these questions, particularly questions on end times and questions on perseverance of the saints. Not sure I'll be able to get to all the questions tonight, but first of all, I just wanted to say hi and glad you made it. But I do want to talk about the questions he wrote me on perseverance of the saints. The first thing he asked me was that this is a gentleman by the name of Sharon. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, I'm not exactly sure where he is from. I know he wrote me, and I'm sorry if you're watching this. I can't remember exactly where you're from, and I also apologize if I am not saying your name correctly. But he asked me, I was going through your video, Objections to Perseverance of the Saints, and I have a few questions regarding it. The first one was about intentional sin. You had mentioned that on the Day of Atonement was for intentional sin too. I went through that chapter and could not find any particular reference to it. Can you clear that, please? Can you clear that, please? Also about John, what about John 15:6? How can that be explained? Is it a believer, or does this passage mean something other than that? Also, I am searching for materials on the origin of hyper grace movement. Could you point out to any videos you have made? Well, I have not made any videos on hyper grace, but let me just say that Michael Brown has done some really good work on the hyper grace issue. So I would suggest looking him up on that issue. For me, Michael Brown is good when it comes to that which he is good on, and bad on that which he is bad at. And basically, I disagree with Michael Brown on the issue of Calvinism. I agree with him on a lot of other issues, the issues of the filling of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, baptism of the Spirit, those kind of things. Gifts for today, him and I would have many, many similar views, but on issues regarding Calvinism, he and I don't have similar views. But his work on hyper grace is really good, and I have listened to some stuff on hyper grace from him, but honestly, it's not something I've put my mind to at this point to really be able to give definitive answers like origin, everything that's a problem with it, whatever. If there's more specific questions, I could try to answer that. So the second question is this idea of intentional sin, because I think that this person's bringing this up because in the study I did, I went through over and over again in the Old Testament, where it says that you could make a sacrifice if it's unintentional sin. And then I said, I think the only time that there was, or maybe I even overstated my case and said that the only time intentional sin was taken care of was on Yom Kippur. And it's been a while since I've looked at that study. It's kind of weird because like sometimes you'll get something settled in your mind, and at the time you'll know why you believed it, and then when somebody asks you later, you'll go back and go, maybe I overstated the case or something, or at the time, what was I thinking? But let me just say this right off the bat: it's been a while since I've looked that up, the Day of Atonement, that kind of a thing, to really go through that thoroughly. But let me just say this on the outset: I would say, because the Old Testament makes a big deal, especially the first 5 books, and in Leviticus, it keeps going over and over and saying for intentional sin, for unintentional sin, for unintentional sin, for unintentional sin, because it keeps doing that over and over again. I would say if that's not mentioned, then I would say that it would include all sin. That would just be an inclusion of all sin. But let me also say this as well: none of those things took away sin permanently. Okay, the book of Hebrews tells us that very directly, that the blood of bulls and goats can never take away sin. So whether it's intentional sin or unintentional sin, the old covenant couldn't take away that sin. This is why these people were held in Abraham's bosom before they went to be with the Lord in heaven. And then that was a big change at what Christ did on the cross. Was he then was able to empty out the good side of Abraham's bosom and take these people into heaven. So whether or not it's intentional or unintentional are both taken care of at the cross. And those saints in the Old Testament were not in a place of torture after their death, but they were in a holding place known as Abraham's bosom or paradise, basically referred to the same place, but they were not let into the immediate presence of God until their sin was taken care of, intentional or unintentional. Now, what the Old Testament sacrifices did do was appease God's like immediate wrath at the time. So it's not like God was just like pouring out wrath at every moment on these people. So it would appease them in this relationship as it's building towards the cross, which was a unique relationship amongst all the other nations. So I don't believe that it didn't do nothing, but I don't believe it permanently took away sin. That's what the book of Hebrews says. It says that these things, it's impossible to take away sin through the shedding of anybody's blood but Jesus Christ, because he was the perfect representation of us. Sorry, I'm about to sneeze here. So he brings up this really good verse that seems to go against the idea of perseverance of the saints, and that's out of John 15:6. And I'm just going to go ahead and read it real quickly for you, and then talk a little bit about hermeneutics and talk a little bit about what this verse is saying here. So John 15:6 says, "If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch that withers, and the branches are gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you." By this, and then he goes on, and before this it talks about abide, abide, abide. It's over and over again. Verse 4, it says, "Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me." Now, I guess the implication of this, of bringing a verse up like this, is, doesn't this contradict perseverance of the saints? And here's why I'm going to say no, it doesn't contradict perseverance of the saints, although on the surface it might look like it does. First of all, perseverance of the saints is not the same thing as once saved, always saved. Okay. Now, yes, once a person is saved, they're always saved. Once a person is truly saved, he's always saved. So when somebody says, "Do you believe in eternal security, or do you believe in once saved, always saved?" I say, if you mean by that somebody who has truly received Christ, has been born again by the Spirit, can never become unborn again or suffer the wrath of hell. Okay, I agree. Yes, I totally agree. However, there is a large subsection of people who believe in once saved, always saved, or perseverance of the saints, who basically believe that once somebody says the sinner's prayer, or once somebody's made confession, or once somebody's been baptized, they're saved and can never be lost. I don't believe that. I don't believe they were ever saved in the first place, but I'm jumping ahead. Okay. I'm jumping ahead of myself to kind of reveal where I'm at. But there is this large subset. So I don't like to call it once saved, always saved, although I agree with that sentiment in and of itself. I believe in perseverance of the saints, or sometimes called preservation of the saints, which is two sides of the same coin. The saints will be preserved throughout time, but the way you demonstrate that you have been saved is by the fruit you bear in your life. But remember that fruit is a result of being connected to the tree. It's not the other way around. It's not if you're producing apples, it's because you're an apple tree. Okay? It's the apple tree that comes first, and then the fruit that comes second. And that's how you tell that it's an apple tree. How you tell that I'm a Christian is that I bear fruit. And if I'm not bearing fruit, then I am more than likely not a Christian. Now, you can go through seasons in your life where you're falling away. But if you're truly a Christian, you will be brought back to faith. Okay, you will eventually be brought back to faith, or I would say punished even to the point of physical death, where God finally takes you home and says, enough. All right, so why then? So then what is it about this verse? Well, let me tell you a little bit about hermeneutics first and talk about what we call amending of verses. This is something I've been going over in my Tuesday night class, and actually I'm going to go over this on Sunday because it's kind of interesting, because Sunday I'm going to be talking about apostasy in dealing with, as I'm working verse by verse through Amos. So, first of all, let me say this. We all, this got caught here. Okay, let me just do a little bit of hermeneutical explanation here, kind of off the top of my head, and then I will apply that to this verse and talk about what's going on. So follow me here, okay? So we all amend verses. And by amend verses, I do not mean we distort verses, okay? I mean that we bring clarity to verses based on other verses that teach something more clear. So an example of this is, now whether or not this is a good example or bad example, depending upon what you believe, just for the sake of argument, hear me out on this, okay? So Jesus said, "This is my body." So I'm not Lutheran, nor am I Anglican, nor am I Catholic. So when Jesus says, "This is my body," I mean, I interpret that this is a picture of my body. And when I say this is a picture, some people would look at the text and say, well, it doesn't say this is a picture of my body. It says this is my body. And I would say, well, yes, but the way people spoke, it's not like a textbook where you're taking a word and you're using it in one way all the time. I can show you a picture of my wife, and the common way I would refer to that picture is I would not say, this is a picture of my wife. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't even bring it up. I would say oh, here, yeah, that's my wife. Or that's my wife, and that's my dog. Here's a picture of my dog. Now, what I mean by that, and if you were interpreting this later to somebody who said, boy, that's his dog, that's his wife, or that's his house, that's what it means, that's his house, because he said that's his house. And you say, no, what he meant was that was a picture of his house. And you would be rightly interpreting my meaning. You would be rightly interpreting my words, because that's what I meant, because that's how we speak in everyday common language. I don't pause to say that is a picture of my house. Another common one would be like, I am a son of God. Now, what I mean by that is not I am a son of God in the same way Jesus is the son of God, nor do I mean that I am a son of God in the same way that the angels are called sons of God. I don't mean I'm the son of God in the same way a Mormon means I'm the son of God. So even though I say, let's just say I'm talking to somebody and I say, hey, I'm a child of God, you later might come along and amend my words. And by amend, I don't mean distort. You would come along later and say something like, what he meant is he's been born again, brought into the fold of Christ, and that he has been adopted as a son, and he means something different than the LDS person means, and he's not claiming the same thing Christ is claiming, nor is he claiming to be the euphemism for an angel used in the Old Testament. And you would be right. You would be rightly amending my words to get to the meaning. And why do I do that? Why do we do that? Well, we do that because I'm speaking in ordinary language, and you understand me, and I don't pause. Okay. So when I get to a verse that says this, this is not the only verse I have to interpret. Now, the next thing I want you to understand before we get to this verse and we look at it. So number one, I'm going to be looking at that verse, and I'm going to be telling you that this verse doesn't teach that you can lose your salvation or teach something different than the perseverance of the saints. Okay, I'm going to be amending that verse, but I'm not going to be amending that verse and distorting it. I'm going to be bringing the whole light to bear on that verse, and then look at what the verse has to say. It has to say itself. Okay. The next thing I want you to understand too is that as a Calvinist, as somebody who believes in perseverance of the saints, I do believe in apostasy. I do believe that people can be connected to Christ in a way short of salvation, and then leave the faith. Okay, I don't believe somebody can be truly born again and leave the faith, but I do believe that somebody can be raised in a church, all the things, just like Judas was. Judas had a relationship with Christ, but he didn't have a saving relationship with Christ. Judas had a true relationship with Christ, but he never had a saving relationship with Christ. John points this out in John chapter 6, where Jesus said, but one of you is a devil. He didn't say one of you, he says one of you is a devil. And John later, I'm forgetting the verse, marks us out by saying, and he was always stealing from the money bag as he pleased. And, he was doing this because he was lying. Now, no one could say that he didn't have a true relationship with Jesus, but he did not have the same kind of relationship with Jesus that Paul had, or that Peter had, that John had, that the rest of the apostles had. So a true relationship with Jesus doesn't always mean a saving relationship with Jesus. That's another factor you have to put in there. So why would I then, and then the other thing is I don't think he's talking about that. So I don't think he's talking about salvation here. He's talking about outward connecting. Are you going to be around me? Are you going to be connected to me? I'll get to that in just a moment here. Okay, I got a couple of thoughts here that are kind of floating, and I'm trying to nail them down here. The other problem is if I took this verse, it's not like you can take this verse and not amend other verses. Okay, and I would think that if you took this verse to mean that you can lose your salvation, you would have to then reinterpret a plethora of other verses that plainly teach that you cannot lose your salvation. Okay, that plainly teach the perseverance of the saints. Okay, so that's the issue. So it's not as though you can look at John chapter 15 verse 6 and go, well, there you go. The Bible teaches that you can lose your salvation, that Christians can lose their salvation, and then you're off scot-free. No, you are then going to have to reinterpret John chapter 6, where Jesus, where the connection is, all that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will raise up on the last day. You're going to have to find a reason to break that connection. You're going to have to find a reason to break the connection, which says that when John chapter 10, he says that I will lose none of them. I will lose none of them. And that the Father is greater than I, and that no one can snatch them from my hand. No one can snatch them from the Father's hand. It says no one can. It doesn't say no one, but you can. And some people will try to say, well, the devil can. Well, can the devil do it without your permission? Well, no. Well, then if no one can, and that means you, and you have to cooperate with the devil in order for you to lose your salvation, then you can't either. Okay, it doesn't work either way. So you'd have to amend that verse. But I actually find the strongest case for the perseverance of the saints in Romans chapter 8. And if you want to look at Romans chapter 8, you can. Now, here's why. And here's why I would take this as my stand. Because anytime you're interpreting the Bible, and you're looking at an issue, you're going, okay, I want to look at perseverance of the saints, or I want to look at, once saved, always saved, or I want to look at predestination. You always go to the place where that is the topic, okay? That's where you go. That's where you build your foundation. And then if you need to make an amendment somewhere else, then that's where you make the amendment. In other words, you fit it into that theology. You don't amend the very, I don't take John 15:6 and amend Romans chapter 8, which you would have to do. But the problem with that is again, Romans chapter 8 is the very place where Paul is addressing this issue. So where I would say that the place in John 15 is not where he's addressing that issue. Okay, so he's actually addressing the issue here in Romans chapter 8. Now, what he is addressing, I will get to, because I do think he's talking about apostasy. I do think he's talking about people leaving, and we'll talk about that in just a minute in due course here. But in Romans chapter 8, it says, in verse 29, it says, for those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. Okay, so there's this unbroken chain here, which actually it's one of the only places where Paul skips sanctification altogether. He goes from eternity past to eternity future. Now, let me just, I can't answer every objection, but let me just give one that somebody might bring up. It says, for those whom he foreknew, and they'll say, oh, see, it's based on foreknowledge. Well, regardless of how you get to the elect, once you get there, it says you can't be lost. Okay, that's what this verse plainly teaches. The other thing is those whom he foreknew is a statement of whom he foreknew, not what he foreknew they would do. It's not like, oh, these whom he foreknew would believe. No, it's those whom he foreknew. And knowing is an intimate statement. Adam knew his wife and she became pregnant. That doesn't mean he has an intellectual comprehension. Jesus said, away from me, on the day of judgment, I never knew you. That doesn't mean he's ignorant of who they are. That means he doesn't have a relationship with them. So to foreknow means to have a relationship with these people. And notice that from the predestined all the way to glorified is connected by key. So you would have to take John 15:6 and you would have to amend this verse, which I think is, in my opinion, hermeneutical suicide. This is the very place where he is talking about eternity past to eternity future. And you would have to make it say something like, and those whom he predestined, he also called, if they would be willing to be called. And those whom he also called, he justified, if they're willing to be justified. And those whom he glorified, he cooperated, he justified, he also glorified, if they cooperate. You'd have to make this verse say this. And for me, why would you take the very place where he's discussing the issue and re-amend that, rather than talking about the place where he's really not discussing the issue? Okay, that's really what I'm getting at. Now, well, what is Jesus talking about? Well, here's the next thing you have to keep in mind. You have to keep in mind that the New Testament was written to people, the general audience. And, as somebody who's looking out over a general audience, I like, if I look out over my congregation, well, I have a really small congregation, so I'm pretty sure I know everyone there, and I would bet everyone there is saved. But, if you look at a larger congregation, you don't know if everybody there is saved. You don't know. You just don't know, And the Bible was written, and Jesus spoke to the congregation. Not that Jesus might not necessarily know, because he's God. So, he would know. But in a large congregation, you're dealing with people who look like Christians but who aren't Christians and who leave the faith. That happens. That's a real phenomenon. And I think Jesus is addressing that real phenomenon here. These warning passages are true warning passages because we don't know who the elect are. And so the Bible says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to do. So if you find the willing and the doing, it's God who did that in you. It's not you who did that. It's God who did that in you. Now, people leave the faith. People look like born-again Christians. Judas looked like a true follower of Christ. On the night he betrayed Christ, and Jesus said, one of you is going to betray me, the apostles didn't sit around and go, Lord, is it Judas? But he said he was a devil. That he was a devil. He didn't say he's a good person. He said he was a devil. He said, but one of you is a devil. Not you'll become a devil, but is a devil. And again, you'd have to amend that to mean something like, well, he is becoming a devil. And I don't find hermeneutical justification to amend that verse to mean one of you will become a devil. He says one of you is a devil. Jesus said that. So now let's talk about apostasy, because we see people leaving the faith. Now, there is only... Now, that's a phenomenon, and it's a phenomenon in the New Testament. In the New Testament, it addresses the whole body, the whole congregation, says, hey, stay with Christ. If you leave, you trample the blood of Christ underfoot. Hebrews 6, passages like that. But do you know that there is only one verse in the New Testament that I know of anyway? I'm not necessarily a Bible expert, but I don't have the whole thing memorized. But there's only one verse in the entire Bible that explains apostasy. In other words, we see people who we think are born again and leave. We see people who are in the church and who leave. Even prominent people, preachers and people you would have bet your life were saved, kind of a thing. But there's only one verse that explains kind of like what's happening behind the scenes. What's happening behind the scenes. And that's found in 1 John chapter 2. So if you want to look at 1 John chapter 2, this is the explanation of why people leave. So 1 John chapter 2, verse 18, children, it is the last hour. And as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, so many Antichrists have come. Therefore, we know it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not of us. Okay? So he's saying here that now he's talking about a group of people that this happened to in his day. But I don't think it'd be any different than looking at somebody happen in our day as well. He's explaining why there's this group of people that left us. Now listen, he says, they went out from us, but they were not of us. And then he goes on to say, if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. You see, people who leave and who leave permanently were never really part of the body of Christ. And the Bible does address this. The Bible addresses apostasy. Right here it addresses apostasy, and it tells you why. They went out from us, and it says, and if they were of us, they would have continued with us. So do people leave the faith? Yes. Does this mean that they were born again and became unborn again, or they had salvation and lost salvation? Well, look, I mean, not according to John. And I find no reason to amend this verse. They were not of us. If they had been with us, they would have continued with us. So now let's jump back to John chapter 15. And why I think this is talking about something short of salvation. So this brings us to kind of the larger context of what Jesus was doing. Jesus was ushering in the end of the old covenant and bringing on the beginning of the new covenant. And Jesus here is saying that he is the true Israelite. And I believe that what's basically being said here is you have to be on this new program with God. It's not good enough to say you're connected with God and remain under the old covenant. That old covenant's going away. Now, why do I say this? Now look here in verse 15. It says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Again, I don't have time to go through this whole thing, but if you look at Isaiah 5:7 and Isaiah 27, 2 through 6, Israel is likened to a vineyard, and a vine. And anyway, it goes on to Israel being likened to a vineyard. And basically what Jesus is saying is, I'm the true Israel. Okay, this is analogous to what happened in Matthew chapter 2, where it says, out of Egypt I called my son. And Jesus is being likened to Israel. He's the true Israelite. He spends 40 days in the wilderness. He's tempted by the devil. He passes the test. And basically what he's saying here is, I am the true Israelite. And what he's saying here is because remember, this is the night he's going to be crucified. And so he's setting up the conditions of the new covenant. And he's saying, it's not good enough that you're connected to Moses. You have to be connected to me. And in the Old Testament, you see, you could be an Israelite in the Old Testament and be under that covenant. But now God is doing something new, and he's saying it's not good enough for you to be connected to Moses under the Old Testament. You have to be connected to me. And if you are not connected to me, if you decide to remain under the Old Covenant, you will be broken off and thrown away, and you won't. And you have to bear fruit as well. Okay, but look, I didn't want to say that like that. Like what I meant was this: bearing fruit means that that you're connected to him. And if you don't bear fruit, you're broken off and thrown into the fire. That's apostasy. But remember what John said. He who, if they would have been with us, they would have remained with us. But you have to abide in me. So in other words, what Jesus is saying here is it's no longer good enough for you to abide under the old covenant. You have to abide now in him. And yes, now, if you don't abide in him, you'll be cut off. And what he's saying here is, if you're going to stick to the old covenant, you're going to be broken off. You have to be abide in him. Now, to be connected to the old covenant was to be connected to God, but not everybody under the old covenant was necessarily saved. We know this, right? But now what he's doing is he's stepping it up. He's saying it's no longer good enough. He's saying, I'm the true Israelite. That old Israelite, that's going away. That's going to be gone. By 70 AD, that form of worship is going to be over. It's going to be phased out. So what he's saying here is, yes, if you don't abide in me, it's not good enough for you to say, well, I'm connected to God because I live under the old covenant. I agree with Moses. That's what he's saying here. So this is what I believe that he's saying here. And listen, it says, I am the true vine. And him saying I am the true vine is him saying I'm the true Israelite. Look it up. Isaiah 5:7, Isaiah 27, 2 through 6. I am the true vine. My Father is the true vine dresser. Every branch that is in me does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. Now, yes, if you're connected to Christ, the way Judas was connected to Christ, you're going to be cut away. No doubt about it. But that's different than saying this person was saved and this person is now no longer saved. Judas was never saved. So every branch, but he was connected to Christ. He had a true relationship with Jesus, but he didn't have a saving relationship with Jesus. Now, why do I believe that? Well, again, it's based on these other verses. It's based on what Paul said in Romans 8. It's based on what Jesus said earlier about that he's not a sheep loser. Okay? It's not whether or not you can lose your salvation. It's whether or not Jesus loses any sheep. Is he a bad shepherd to where he loses sheep? No, not at all. And so, yes, very much so. I believe this. I totally believe this. I am the vine, and you are the vine dressers. Whoever abides in me, and I in him, he is it that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like the branch that withers, and the branches are gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish. And he goes on to say other things. But what do I think that verse is teaching? I think that verse is teaching apostasy. I think that verse is teaching the same thing that John said. They went out from us, but they were never part of us. If they had been part of us, they would have remained with us. Paul connects eternity past to eternity future. And then he goes on with this election where he says, neither height nor depth nor anything present nor anything past will be able to separate you from the love of Christ, which is in Christ Jesus, our Lord. Now, that's not the love of Christ like his general love for the world. That's talking about the elect. Now, somebody might out there argue about, well, how one gets elected. I'm not going to address that argument right there. Whatever you believe, he's talking about the elect there. If you believe that the foreknowledge view, fine. We'll discuss that on another video. But what he's saying there is, if you are elect, there isn't anything in all creation, nothing under the earth, nothing above the earth, nor height, nor depth, nor things to come, nor will be able to separate you from Christ. So that's the bottom line. That's where the issue of perseverance of the saints is addressed. That's where the issue of once saved, always saved is addressed. So when I look at this verse, I look at it just like anybody else would look at it. I mean, yeah, people looked like Christians and then they leave, for sure. Does that mean they were truly Christians? No. And let me just leave with this, because I'm repeating myself over again, but let me just leave you with this thought. It's a repeat of the same thought. Not every relationship with Christ is a saving relationship. Judas had a true relationship with Christ. Judas was connected to Christ, but not in the same way Peter was connected to Christ. And Judas was cut off and thrown into the fire. This is not saying that Judas was saved and then lost, because again, Christ said, one of you is a devil, talking about Judas. And he knew who was following him from the beginning. Anyway, so that's enough of that. I repeated myself on several trains of thought there. I hope you liked this. Please let me know if you did. I thank you. And if you ever have any questions that I can help answer, let me know. I hope I answered it. Anyway, I answered the best I could possibly answer. I think I gave cogent reason as to not believing that this verse teaches against the perseverance of the saints, but teaches apostasy, which I do believe in. I can't convince you. I mean, I believe the plain reading of the word is that those who are truly saved will always be saved. And also the true reading of the word is that the Bible was written to a group of people who, like, if I preach, I don't know out there who's saved, who's not saved. And so I give the warning. And the Bible teaches that there are people who are connected to Christ in an unsaving way. You go to church your whole life, you're around it. And I think that that's what those verses are talking about. You're connected to Christ, but not in a saving way, but a true connection. Okay. All right. Enough rambling on here. Okay. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye.